ganadora del Global Teacher Prize en 2021, el ganador considerado como el Nobel de la Educación. Para ella, la educación es un derecho humano y por lo mismo es fundadora de varias organizaciones para brindar empoderamiento a deportistas, inmigrantes, refugiados, indocumentados y personas sin seguridad alimentaria. Demos la bienvenida a Keishia Thorpe.
Buenos días. Mi nombre es Keishia Thorpe. Soy nativa de Jamaica y ciudadano de los Estados Unidos. Enseño inglés en International High School, Langley Park. How did I do? Awesome. So, as I continue, I also want you to feel free to give me a little nod, a little snap of the finger, or a little applause if you hear something interesting or something that you connect to, okay? So, let's practice a little bit. You all look beautiful today. All right, we got it. Awesome. All right, so have you ever thought about how war impacts children around the world? And as we think about that, I want to actually begin with my own personal story. So, growing up in Jamaica, which is a developing nation, I am no stranger to the immense impact of conflict or war or violence on children's education. As a matter of fact, my life has been plagued with endless wars. So beginning at the age of 3 years old, I was uprooted from the place I called home in the city to move to the more rural area with my grandmother because of political unrest that has caused us to lose our home. I was uprooted and separated from my family, my community, and most of all, separated from my mother. So although it has been less violent in the rural neighborhood, we were not just fighting to overcome the physical effects of violence and conflicts, but the consequence of war, poverty. My mother was a teenage parent who did not finish high school, and my grandmother only had a 6th grade education. As I got older, I felt stuck in a predicament that I did not even create for myself. But my grandmother made sure that she hoped for a better future for myself and my sister, even though I felt lost and it seemed like I was plagued with endless wars. I remember my first experience with education was in an abandoned, unfinished building, and we under a large tree, shaded by a large tree, and I remember us sitting on a log. And I had very limited opportunities. And statistically, I was one of those children who was in those who fell below the poverty line and should have dropped out of school, became pregnant, sell drugs, end up in prostitution, or any other worse predicaments just to survive. However, my grandmother was relentless in helping us to imagine a better future for ourselves and also instilling in us the value of education. So at the end of high school, I was lucky enough to earn a scholarship to a college in the US. This transformed my life. But it took overcoming many challenges, especially assimilating to the US culture. I graduated college and was heading to law school. I thought at this point I had achieved the American dream, but somehow I pivoted from law to education when I saw how many children that looked like me were struggling in America. I was motivated to become a teacher to make a difference in their lives because their story resembled my story. And since then, it has been quite a long journey to becoming the Global Teacher Prize winner. My students are all immigrants and refugees, and they are from different countries, about 23 different countries, and they speak about 13 different languages, and most of them are the first in their families to even go to high school. And they're all from low-income backgrounds, and some have been victims of violence, and some have left their countries due to wars. So I want to share some facts with you. So, did you know that approximately 44 million immigrants in the United States, and there is 281 million internationally? The largest immigrant population in the United States is from Mexico. The reason for this migration is due to wars and violence. And another reason for this is opportunities, because according to the World Bank, Mexico is among the 15 largest economies in the world, but has underperformed in growth, inclusion, poverty reduction in the last 30 years. Its economic growth averaged just above 2% each year between 1980 and 2018. So wars do not only affect countries' economies, but its people suffer the most. Today, there are 79.5 million people across the world who have been forcibly displaced. And this is the highest figure ever. And there's also 50% of these are refugee children, and they're from developing countries, and 85% of them are refugees. As you know, the war between Russia and Ukraine has not ceased. Last year, the BBC reported that more than 5 million people have left Ukraine for neighboring countries, while 7 million are still thought to be displaced inside of Ukraine due to the war between Russia and Ukraine. UNICEF estimates that more than 2.5 million of these displaced are children. About 16% of enrolled students and 6% of educators have fled Ukraine to neighboring countries. And NPR also reported that since Russia invasion in February of last year, over 2,000 education facilities has been damaged and 284 has been destroyed. So you can imagine the impact of war. As far back as 1994, more than 2/3 of teachers in primary and secondary schools were killed or displaced as a result of the Rwanda genocide. So not to mention the countless school shootings over the past years, and there are many more ways wars are negatively impacting our students, and too much of a short time to go over all of them. But we want to make sure that we do understand how war impacts students' education. So these are some of the challenges most of the students face due to wars. So one of the things that I want to point out first is interrupted education. So in the US, we call it SLIFE, and SLIFE stands for Students with Limited or Interrupted Formal Education. And these students, this occurs because these students actually have experience with war, civil unrest, migration, poverty, and other factors, which do not help them to be able to learn and achieve as their counterparts. And then we have ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences. And most of these students who are from war zones experience most ACEs and childhood experiences that have grave impact on their learning as well. Another one is that students experience cultural and linguistic barriers, minority beliefs, and other challenges. For example, our Muslim students who have been discriminated because of their religious beliefs. Levels of native education is another factor. And of course, we have socioeconomic resources, which is also a challenge that these families experience. And lastly, immigrants also face additional challenges when they go to other countries that actually rejects their status. So as you can see, conflicts have adverse effects on education in many ways. Students, teachers, and families have to deal with long-term trauma in dealing with violence and death. War causes destruction and damages to schools and educational infrastructures and disrupts schools and learning. When this happens, students experience interrupted education, and in most cases, they are displaced and never recover their learning loss, especially those from developing countries. And research have found that more than half of the world's primary age students or children that are out of school are estimated to come from conflict-affected fragile states. And children who grow up in poor countries have a less likelihood of pursuing their dreams and ambitions due to the experiences of violence that traumatizes them. Even UNESCO reported on how conflicts negatively impact the average years of education attained and the literacy rate for these children. And those who are of school age who experience conflict have lower educational attainment and less likelihood to continue their education due to experiencing conflict. When there's conflict, it also increases students' and teachers' absenteeism. War only exacerbates inequalities in any society, especially for those who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and they are the least likely to recover from this. So, when we think about war, it is a grave violation of children's rights and children's future. They are uprooted from their homes and forced to live in places where they're met with social, cultural, and linguistic barriers, economic challenges, and discrimination. And no child should have to experience these issues. War should not be a passage of right for any child. So let's look at some of the scalable approaches to meet the needs of those students, especially those who come from war zone. So, of course, the United Nations has stepped in, and the United Nations have recommended the community school model. So the community school model is really a model that offers wraparound services for students and their families and help them to integrate back into the community. And this is funded usually by the government with special funding. And the school model helps bridging students and families with social services, academic services, personal needs, legal services, and healthcare services, and so on. All of the things that children from lower socioeconomic background will need in order to integrate into communities and have their needs met in order to begin learning. Many schools in the US actually have been adopting this model due to the rise in diversity of our student population, and also the immigrants and refugee students who are coming in seeking safety, educational opportunities, and just a better chance at life. So let's talk about some of the cultural and linguistic practices that we can use to help support our students. So, raise your hand if you have one teacher in your life that you can say had a great impact on your outcome. Oh, awesome. Awesome, thank you. So when our students are affected by wars and conflicts in our classroom, they come in and they feel like they don't belong, right? They feel like outsiders, and many of them don't have dream of even completing school because they don't see it in their future. And it's also up to us, really, to help them navigate. And as I see your hands across, it means that there were a lot of teachers who have done that for you to help you navigate this life and also your challenges. So the best teachers, they build relationships with students. Before any learning can begin, they help to create a safe and inclusive, warm and loving environment for their students. Teachers have to build trust. When teachers build trust with their students, students want to meet their expectations, and students actually achieve more. Sometimes teachers are the only caring adults some of these children will ever meet in their lifetime. The best teachers also teach students about the world, to understand their identities, to discuss social justice issues and how those things impact their lives, like war. to teach them how to be proud of who they are and to value who they are, to tell their stories, to write down their stories, how to respect others' perspectives and worldviews, and how to tolerate each other, how to build relationship, and how to also choose peace over conflict. We teach students that. A part of culturally responsive practice is also attending to the social emotional needs of our students, because students, especially who come from conflict zones, require that we tap into their social emotional well-being before we're able to prepare them for learning. So we want to make sure that we support our students who are affected by war by making sure our students feel safe, valued, recognized, respected, and affirmed. We have to see our students we have to be in the shoes of our students, use empathy to connect with them, to build relationships with them, implement culturally relevant pedagogy, make learning practical for our students, use student-centered approaches in our classroom, teach students how to transfer academic skills to solve real-world problems, teach them from social justice lens so that they can learn about the world around them, teach students to self-advocate, and in most cases, please help to empower their voices. Teach them also how to be independent thinkers and global citizens. Teach them how to choose peace over conflict, and teach students how to dream. In doing this, you help them aspire to conquer the world. You give them the confidence which becomes their greatest superpower. So, as we know, it takes a village. I know we can all agree that the government could do more for our students, right? How many of you also agree that it takes a village? Right. So, schools and teachers can only do so much. Governments need to invest in safe schools and community programs, especially in war zones. There needs to be an investment in teacher and support training to equip teachers with culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogical skills to be able to respond to the trauma and the crisis of our students, especially those affected by war. As a teacher of immigrant and refugee students, even as I speak about the effects of conflicts on children and education, I want you to ponder of how the physical effects not only affects our vulnerable population, and those are not the only wars they're fighting against, but any disruption in a child's life is considered a war on their future. They have to fight against war of poverty. They have to fight against the war of social injustices, oppressive systems that violate their human rights, especially women's rights and girls' education. They have to fight against unequal distribution of wealth, and the list goes on. So today, I challenge the government to put at the top of their priorities improving education and teaching quality, and improving safety protocols in communities and schools everywhere to make sure that all children have an opportunity, a fair chance at a better way of life. Today, I also challenge all of you to think about what I've shared with you and the responsibility that you and I have to ensure that we create a safe, prosperous, and peaceful world for all of our children. Education is a human right, and all children should have access to it without disruption. Every child needs a champion, an adult who will never give up on them and understand the power of connection, and insist that they become the very best they can possibly be. Today, I challenge you to be their champions. Teachers are students' greatest resource, not the infrastructure. Again, let me say, teachers are students' greatest resource, not the infrastructure. So, we need to make sure that all students have a quality education. Students need education, and education needs teachers. There are so many challenges that we have to overcome to make sure that students who come from war zones we make sure that we meet their needs and meet them where they are. And so if you have an observation, You have an obligation. We all have an obligation. Education cannot wait, and Mexico needs to catch up. The world needs to catch up because students deserve the right to safety, a quality education, and well-trained teachers. Regardless of their immigration status, their geography, their levels of literacy, their ethnicity, socioeconomic background, and preferences, so that no one is left behind. So I will actually end my presentation the same way that I began. My first experience with education was in an abandoned, unfinished building shaded by a large tree and learning while sitting on a log. But I had teachers who cared enough to hold my dreams for me until I could actualize them for myself. That's why education is hard work. Students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So let's bring back safety in our schools and our communities so that children have an opportunity to prosper. War should not be a passage of right for our children. So I'm going to ask you to share with me in the end of my presentation. I'm going to say it in English, and I want you to repeat in Spanish. Believe in students. Believe in their stories. Believe in their value. Believe in their future. And above all, believe in their teachers. Thank you.